You were never meant to stand out. Some people are just made to support the stars. My mother said that to me once, not in anger, not even in disappointment. She said it the way you might offer a tissue to someone crying at a funeral, gentle tidy as if she were doing me a favour. I am Jessie Walsh, US Army Intelligence, General. But to my family, I was nothing. I was 19, fresh out of basic training, still stiff in my first uniform, and she told me that over coffee, stirring sugar as if she hadn't just split something open in me. I laughed, pretended it didn't hurt, pretended I didn't carry that sentence around like a scar stitched beneath my ribs. But I did, for years, for miles, across borders no one names. Now I was home, if you could call it that. Thanksgiving. Every chair at the table full. Even Brian, the neighbour's kid, had a seat because he'd just started law school. My name card was missing. My mother handed me a napkin and said, "Just grab a plate and find somewhere." So I stood at the kitchen counter beside the sink while my family dined like royalty. "This stuffing is perfect," said my aunt, raising her glass toward Erica. "Just like your promotion, perfectly timed." Erica smiled, lashes fluttering, like she knew the stage lights were on her. "Well, you know me. I like things neat, achievable." She looked at me when she said that, held the pause just long enough for everyone to notice. My father chuckled. Some folks confuse chaos for courage. He wasn't looking at anyone in particular, but the silence afterward landed squarely on me. "I heard you're in admin now," Erica asked, still smiling, but her eyes were sharp as pins. "Military desk work suits you. Stable, safe." A cousin leaned over. "Better than nothing, right?" Nobody laughed. Not loudly. Just those small, tight chuckles that hum through a room like static. I didn't answer. I focused on the edge of my plate, on the cranberry sauce bleeding into the turkey. I remembered a night in Kandahar where I dragged a wounded tech specialist through a collapsed hallway under sniper fire. I remembered how she kept whispering, "Don't let me go." And I didn't. But sure. Office work. My mother served dessert pecan pie Erica had made. She even baked, she beamed. Is there anything our Erica can't do? Fly a stealth recon drone through active combat zones, I thought. Negotiate the release of 30 hostages with a satellite phone and a 5-minute window. But no one asked me to share. After dinner, I started stacking plates. Nobody stopped me. It's funny how habits cement themselves. In this family, I was always the one who cleaned up. Not because I was kind, but because being helpful was the closest thing I got to being wanted. As I rinsed forks and felt warm water sting the cut on my knuckle fresh from unpacking gear, they didn't even ask about my aunt passed by and whispered, "Tough year, huh, you'll bounce back." Bounce back from what? From serving in countries they couldn't pronounce, from being forgotten on purpose. In the hallway, there was a new family photo on the wall. My brother, a major now, arm around his pregnant wife. Erica, in uniform, polished and glowing. My parents in the centre like a throne. I stepped closer. I had been cropped out, literally. It was a photo I remembered. I remembered standing between Erica and Dad. Now only a sliver of my shoulder remained replaced by Brian, who was doing so well in law. My mother caught me staring. "We needed to balance the frame," she said. "You weren't around much." "I was busy," I said softly. She shrugged. So is everyone." Later that night, I found a quiet spot on the porch. The wind carried the smell of firewood and leaves. I could still hear them inside laughing, toasting Erica again. I sipped cold coffee from the same mug I'd used that morning. It tasted like ash now. They didn't call me a failure. They didn't have to. Silence is louder than shame. My family celebrated medals you could display, titles you could print, speeches, promotions, ranks. But what about the woman who had no photo on the wall because her entire service was classified? What about the soldier whose work didn't fit into a story you could tell over pie? What about me? That night, I made a promise, not to fight for their approval anymore. I had survived IEDs, firestorms, betrayals in enemy territory. I didn't need to keep surviving their indifference, but I also didn't need revenge. I needed truth. Not for them to see me the way I used to beg them to, but to finally see myself. Even in the reflection of a window no one else looked through, even in the corner of a photo where no one noticed I was gone, I existed, just not in ways they could recognize. They thought I quit. West Point, military life, the expectations, the family legacy. Too rigid for her, my father once said to a colleague at a retirement ceremony, not knowing I was standing close enough to hear. Structure just didn't suit her spirit. They nodded, sipped their scotch, and talked about Erica's promotion. I didn't correct them. I never have. Because the truth didn't belong in their world. I never quit. I was recruited. Halfway through my second year at West Point, I was approached by a woman who never gave me her real name. She wore civilian clothes, spoke in clipped sentences, and carried a file with no insignia. She asked if I'd ever wanted to disappear. I remember blinking at her, unsure if it was a question or a test. I said, yes. She slid the folder across the table. I opened it. Inside were names of operatives I'd only heard whispered in security briefings. A list of missions that didn't officially exist. At the bottom, one phrase typed in bold, Operation Lark Shadow, candidate approval pending. The next few weeks were a blur. I signed documents I wasn't allowed to keep, memorized strings of numbers that became new identities. I learned how to mimic dialects, how to change my handwriting into 3 completely different styles, depending on what language I was using. My roommate thought I dropped out because of a nervous breakdown. My commanding officer filed it under psychological unfit. It was the perfect exit story. Neat, believable, controlled. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The program required full removal, clean break, total silence. I was given a boxer ticket and a name that wasn't mine. For months, I trained in an underground facility so isolated it didn't even exist on satellite. My first mission came 3 months later in Ukraine. My cover was a logistics consultant for a mining firm. My real job was to extract a compromised informant who hadn't spoken in days. He broke his silence when I handed him a book I knew he'd memorized in childhood. Later that year, on my mother's birthday, I sent her a small box. Inside was a brooch I remembered her loving when I was a child. Simple, gold, shaped like a feather. No note, no return address, just a quiet offering. It came back 3 weeks later. The post office had scribbled, "Returned," refused in red across the top. No explanation, no apology. That envelope sat in my locker for years. Not because I hoped one day she'd change her mind, but because I needed the reminder silence can cut louder than rejection. In a safe house in Morocco, I carried a duffel bag with false passports, burner phones, and one thing that didn't belong my dress uniform, pressed and wrapped in plastic. I didn't know why I kept it. Maybe because I thought one day someone might ask to see who I was. Not what I did not, who I posed as, but who I had become. It stayed folded untouched, waiting for a ceremony that would never come. There were moments in those years that unspooled like dreams. A man in Prague who tried to guess my real name during a mission dinner. A young translator in Aleppo who told me I reminded him of his sister. A child in Sudan who touched my dog tags and asked if I was real. I didn't answer. How could I, you can't explain absence to people who've never been erased? At night, I practiced writing with my non-dominant hand. Practiced smiling with my eyes while keeping my mouth still. Practice sounding like someone else even in my own head. I became fluent in code switching, not just between languages, but between selves. The version of me who called home on birthdays, using a voice modifier and hung up before they could answer. The version who stood behind tinted windows at my sister's commissioning and left before she saw me. The version who lit a candle every December for the friends I couldn't name out loud, Once in Berlin, I passed a cafe that looked exactly like one my mother used to take us to. I walked in, ordered a coffee I didn't want. I sat near the window and watched people pass. For 23 minutes, I allowed myself to pretend I was someone with a life, a name, a family who saw her. When I left, I dropped a postcard in the mailbox with no return address. On it, I wrote one line: I'm still here. Even if you can't see me, I don't know if it ever arrived. Sometimes I wonder if my mother saw it, if she read the handwriting and wondered, if her fingers hesitated before tossing it into the trash, or if she never even looked. I'm not angry. I stopped needing their permission to exist a long time ago. But I never stopped hoping that one day they'd look past the stars they celebrated and notice the one who kept the sky from falling. That day wasn't today. Today was Erica's. Her ceremony, her stage, her carefully choreographed moment in the sun. Fort Campbell's event hall was dressed like a wedding chapel. The banners, the folded flags, the gleaming medals, everything sparkled under the chandeliers. My mother floated around with the enthusiasm of a campaign manager. She adjusted Erica's collar with a reverence she never used on anyone else. "You look perfect," she whispered, then turned to me. "Are you sure that's what you're wearing?" I glanced down at my blouse, a muted beige, tailored, but simple. "It's fine," I said. "You could have asked Erica. She would have helped you pick something more flattering." There was always a more polished, more put together, more Erica. I was seated at the end of a row, next to Mrs. Callahan, a woman who had once started a rumour that my mother was a nervous wreck during Dad's deployment. She smiled now, like we were old friends. "Oh, how lovely to see you again. I wasn't sure you'd still be around. Thought you had moved on." "I did," I said. "Now I'm back." "Oh," she said, her eyes flickering. "Well, Erica's just radiant, isn't she? So driven." I nodded, driven to the centre of every room, driven to be seen. The speeches began. Names were called, titles read. Erica stood at attention, her posture impeccable, her smile serene. When it was time for the family introduction, my father stepped up and said, "This is Erica's proudest moment. Her journey's been clear from the start. She stayed the course, never wavered." I felt the air shift, and of course we're joined by her sister, who had a brief stint in the military before transitioning to support roles. Support roles. The words landed like spit on pavement. Someone behind me cleared their throat. A child giggled, and Erica, still smiling, held up her hand. Left hand so the light caught the diamond ring she hadn't mentioned until now. "He proposed last week," she beamed. "It's been such a good month." Everyone clapped. I folded my napkin slow and deliberate. It was a habit I developed in interrogation training, calming, repetitive. My thumb traced the crease like it might hold me together. A little girl tugged at my sleeve. Her curls bounced when she whispered, "Have you ever shot a real gun?" I looked at her. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her eyes sparkled with the innocent thrill of danger. "No," I said gently, "but I once helped bring 3 people home without having to fire one." She blinked. "Is that better?" I smiled. "Sometimes it is." She nodded solemnly, then ran off to chase a balloon. Erica stood beside the podium, thanking guests with that rehearsed elegance that photographs well. Her laughter was soft, poised, controlled. I caught her eye once. She raised her brow, tilted her head just slightly as if to say, "See, this is how you do it." I didn't return the look. Instead, I scanned the room. There were photos on a nearby display table, her achievements, her deployments, her graduation. In one, she stood flanked by our parents, all 3 beaming. There were no photos of me. Not one. No record that I'd ever worn the same uniform, walked the same halls, bled in the same sand. At dinner, I was again placed at the edge of the table, next to the +1 of a distant cousin. She didn't speak to me once. Erica sat center, framed by laughter and champagne. My mother leaned in and said, "You should smile more, sweetheart. It softens you." I stared at the untouched pie on my plate. Pechen, Erica's favourite. Someone tapped a glass. A toast, my father declared. To Erica, whose dedication, discipline, and grace continue to inspire us all. They raised their flutes. I raised nothing. Just folded my napkin again. Another quiet act of resistance. Later, as the night stretched thin and guests began to leave, Erica brushed past me. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice low enough to sting. "I wasn't sure you would." I said I would. She glanced down at my blouse again. "It's not about what you wear, you know. It's about showing up right." I did. She shrugged. "Some people need more practice." I watched her walk away. Her heels didn't make a sound on the carpet. But inside me, something echoed. It wasn't jealousy or regret. It was recognition. That everything about this night, the seating chart, the introductions, the toast had been designed to say one thing: you are not her. But what they didn't know, what Erica didn't understand, was that I never wanted to be. I just wanted to be seen. Not for the version of me they could use, but for the version that endured without needing permission. And then without warning, the room fell silent. It wasn't the kind of hush that descends naturally, it was the kind that's yanked out of the air like a cord being cut. The double doors at the back of the hall opened without a sound, yet everyone seemed to feel it. The shift, the chill, the sense that something or someone had entered who wasn't meant to be ignored. A few heads turned. One officer in the front row stood instinctively, and then the rest followed like dominoes. General Hammond had arrived. He moved with the precision of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. His uniform was understated, the medals heavy but not flamboyant. His presence was the real decoration. He didn't scan the room, he searched it. His eyes moved quickly across the crowd, skipping the predictable focal points: Erica, the flag, the podium. Instead, they landed on me. Dead center, 3 rows from the back. His shoulders squared. His jaw tightened slightly. Then he began walking directly, unflinchingly toward me. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't pretend to wonder if it was someone behind me. I knew. His footsteps echoed louder than they should have on that carpet, each one like a slow drumbeat of inevitability. When he reached my row, he paused, clicked his heels together, and lifted his right hand in a formal salute. "General Walsh," he said, voice clear, steady, amplified by silence alone. "It's an honor to see you again." My mother dropped her glass. The sound of it hitting the floor was like a shot. Erica's mouth parted, but no words came. The champagne flute in her hand trembled visibly, catching the light like a nervous secret. I stood, not quickly, not for effect, but with the kind of dignity that grows in the dark unseen, but unbreakable. I returned the salute not for myself, not even for him, but for the men whose names would never be engraved on these polished walls. For the silence I had kept when it cost me everything. "Thank you, sir," I said, level and calm. He held my gaze a moment longer, then nodded with something between pride and reverence. When he turned and walked away, the vacuum remained. No one filled it. No one moved. The applause that had followed Erica's every step now felt impossibly out of place. She stood frozen behind the podium, the pages of her speech fluttering in her hand, like they, too, were unsure of what came next. From the corner of my eye, I saw Mason, one of the younger officers I'd trained, whisper something to the man beside him. That man leaned forward, peered at me, and murmured, "Wait, is that her, the commander from Dagger?" The name hung in the air like gunpowder. No one confirmed, no one denied. I sat back down slowly, feeling not pride exactly, but gravity. The room had shifted. Its centre had changed. and for the first time it wasn't Erica. Across the aisle my mother stared at me, not with rage, not with pride, with confusion, as if trying to reconcile the image in her head, the girl who supposedly quit, who couldn't handle the structure, with the woman standing before her, saluted by a 4-star general. 10 years of silence collapsed in a single second of recognition. She looked away first. Erica's voice finally broke through. "Let's continue," she said, but her tone had lost its luster. Her hands fumbled with her speech. Her eyes didn't find their usual anchor points. Every sentence landed with less weight. Every joke felt mistimed. The audience tried to recover. A polite chuckle here, a nod there. But the centre had shifted. The narrative had cracked. After the ceremony, as guests milled around trying to pretend they hadn't just witnessed a tectonic shift, I stood near the back watching Erica work the room again. But this time her light flickered. People were glancing at me now, whispering, calculating. She caught my eye from across the room. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Mine didn't even try. I turned away. The sunlight coming in through the high windows had begun to shift. It caught on a small flag near the entrance and refracted across the floor in a pattern that looked like fractured glass. I stepped into it. For a moment, the red, white, and blue rippled over me like a second skin, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't a shadow in my own story. I was its centre. But as the applause echoed, so did the memories that even salutes couldn't silence. In the quiet that followed, I could hear it again, the static of the radio, the ragged breath of my teammate Corporal Jensen, calling out Jenny, Sweetie, Uncle Mike's coming home. That radio clip still played in my dreams. The mission in Libya was never supposed to go wrong. We were on a hostage rescue 30 civilians, and they were counting on us. 3 men, Jensen, Ortiz, and Lee, died that night. The intelligence was solid. Earth was where it failed. I swallowed that failure every dawn since. I remember the moment in our makeshift operations tent when the radio fizzled and then snapped into clarity. Jensen's voice broke through static. "Jenny, tell her I love," before the transmission went cold. I hit the transmit button again and again, hoping it was just interference. It never responded. Months later, I found his wife's name in our manila folder. The address was handwritten in my own code. I wrote a letter to her, careful not to identify myself. I wrote about Jensen, how he loved jazz records and Sunday pancakes, how he joked about his daughter's toothless grin, because she's my greatest battle. I wrote that he made it off that rock alive in my memory. Then I mailed it. I prayed she'd read it. It was never returned. I kept the map of the operation with red lines and pinholes marking every step folded inside my dress uniform's pocket. It moved with me through every safe house, every shift, every strategy briefing, until I finally took it out in a forest near Camp Lejeune. The moon was low, the air humid, the crickets hysterical. I placed the map over an old stone and traced the path of the mission with my fingertip. Then I learned a different kind of mission, carving their names beneath it. J.E. Jensen, C. Ortiz, L. Lee. The stone held their names alongside mine, a private memorial no one would visit except me. That night, I wore the uniform, rare, wrinkled, and tucked the map and letters in a sealed pouch. I didn't know why, but carrying their stories felt like carrying my own soul. I can still feel grains of sand that made their way into my boots that night. Caked under my soles, it felt like part of me knew that pain wouldn't wash off easily. When I walked back to my car, lamppost, light caught the humidity on my shoulders, and I wondered if I would ever stop feeling their absence. The medal on that uniform, the one I was never allowed to display, rested at chest level, but it felt hollow. A medal without a name. A service without recognition. And yet, the weight of it was absolute. When I returned to the ceremony hall after my silent tribute, everything felt like an echo. People wandered out, a few stopped to shake my hand, eyes softened. But none asked, never asked about Libya, never asked about the men I carried in my mind. They asked about the ceremony, about Erica, about the general's appearance, and that was enough. Because they didn't need to understand to respect. Maybe they still wouldn't. But I had understood, and I had felt something heavier than any medal could represent. In a quiet room near the back of the hall, Mason, one of the younger lieutenants, found me rubbing at the sand dried around my ankles. His voice was soft. "Captain Walsh," he said, I wanted to thank you for everything. Not for today, for back when. For..." He trailed off. His gaze shifted to the edge of my uniform, near where the ribbon should have been. "For carrying that." I nodded. He swallowed. "You saved lives." It wasn't a question. It was an acknowledgement. And in that moment, I realized the mission didn't end in Libya. It carried on in letters, in stones, in young officers who still believed service meant more than applause. When I finally left the ceremony hall that night, the air was cool and still. The flagstones on the porch seemed solid under my weight. A single guard folded the flag that had lit my path earlier. I paused to watch. The sharp creases snapped as he worked them back into the pattern of honour. The folds reminded me of how we fold ourselves to fit expectations, and how we unfold when we stop trying. Driving away, I felt sand still under my feet, the weight of 3 names etched in stone, the invisible medal at my chest. And I knew the next part of this journey would be telling those stories. Driving away, I felt sand still under my feet, the weight of 3 names etched in stone, the invisible medal at my chest. And I knew the next part of this journey would be telling those stories. I walked into my office the next morning and collected the manila envelope waiting on my desk. It was heavy, sealed in gold, foil, with no return address, no stamp, just the weight of intent. I paused before opening it, half dreading what I'd find. Inside was a printout, a redacted report placing blame on Captain Walshme for a civilian casualty incident in Libya. Accidentally launched ordnance, classified files hidden, civilian lives lost, no context, no justification, just accusation. My hands shook. I rifled through the rest, emails, talking points, a timeline distorted, in saying I sacrificed civilians to complete the mission. This was no hostile informant. This was family-level vendetta. I stared at the page where someone had circled my name in red pen. Underneath, in red lipstick, "Not so perfect now, are you?" I thought of Erica reading that message. I thought of the brochure I'd sent my mother years ago, hoping she'd see me, hope she'd understand. I opened my laptop and accessed the old encrypted drive I'd saved. It took a moment to mount passwords buried under layers, old aliases I'd left behind. There it was, in a folder labelled Libya, D-Conflict. My voice clipped reading code and mission tags. Embedded was a snippet of Erica, reading off numbers, coordinates, dates, names. It was the exact moment she mortgaged my service to her insecurity. She'd done it deliberately. Recorded me, twisted the data, forged the files. She hoped I'd never come back. Wanted me erased from their memory for good. A notification pinged. An email from Colonel Strauss, my former ops commander. Rumour has it, someone arranged for your letter to return unopened. Be careful. Whoever's behind this doesn't want you back. No name, no signature. But I knew. I put the prints and the drive in the same envelope and taped them shut. I walked towards the old photo wall, where Brian stood between our parents and Erica smiling proudly. I put the envelope behind the frame. A silent message I knew. It was her mess. Later, at a base party, I saw Erica twirl, the ring-catching light laughter rolling off her like applause. I approached her when she was alone. She smiled first, but then her face stiffened. "Got your envelope," she said, voice low. "You read it?" "I did," I replied quietly. Her cheeks paled. I pulled out the lipstick-stained print. "This exactly what you intended?" She swallowed, eyes retreating. "You? Why, I know." I turned, flashing the folded drive card between my fingers. "Recorded yourself saying the coordinates, the allegations. You have no defense." Her face twisted between anger and shame. She reached for the envelope. "Give it to me." I didn't move. "You're hurting people," she whispered. "People who've been hurting me my whole life." She dropped her gaze to the floor. For a moment I thought she'd break, but instead she said, "I didn't want you back, not like this. You sent poison to erase me. Because you never left," she said, trembling, "even when I tried to kill your memory." I closed my eyes. I thought of Libya. I thought of Jensen's daughter. I thought of the stone I carved in the forest. I thought of the medal without a name. I thought of the brother officers holding me steady. I thought of valor. "You don't get to decide who lives in memory," I said finally. "Not for me." She looked up then, tears shining. "I just wanted to be the one they saw first." I opened my palm. "And you are. But not if it means erasing me." I stepped back. I walked away, leaving her behind, head bowed, regaining composure, a woman realizing the truth caught up. I knew what I had to do next. Not for them. For me. For the names I carried. I would expose it all, the forged files, the betrayal. And whatever it cost, I'd reclaim my voice not with rage, but with evidence. This wasn't a fight for approval. It was a fight for justice. But justice, when tangled in family, is never clean. It cuts in places you don't expect. I didn't plan on confronting Erica that night. I only meant to return the files to military command, file the report, and walk away. But something in me needed the final note, not as an officer, but as a sister. I found her sitting alone in the family study, the same one Dad used to lock when he didn't want us girls interrupting his silence. She had her back to me, flipping through old sheet music fingers, tracing faded lyrics. When I stepped in, she didn't turn. "You were always the soloist," she said. No greeting, no defensiveness, just memory. "You remember?" I asked. My voice didn't shake. Hers did. "Of course, every Christmas, every pageant. They said your voice had something pure." She looked over her shoulder, then tears welled, but refusing to fall. I was harmony. Background. I didn't answer. There was nothing kind I could say that wouldn't feel like a lie. "Do you know what it feels like?" Erica continued to work twice as hard and still be invisible. I sat across from her. Between us on the table was a half-burned note, edges charred. A childhood letter, probably one we wrote to Santa, together, her looping script beneath mine. "They never framed my letter from West Point," she whispered, "but they kept yours, even after you left." Her hand moved to the edge of the table, gripping it like a lifeline. "Even when you were gone, they still talked about you." I heard the hurt in her words, not envy, but erosion. "You weren't gone," she said. "Not really. You hovered, you haunted." "That wasn't my intention," I said softly. "I wasn't trying to win." "But you always did," she snapped, then broke. Her fingers curled into fists. "Every time I sang, they'd ask if you were coming home. Every uniform I wore, they compared the shine. Even when you disappeared, you were louder than me." She stood suddenly pacing. "I kept trying to matter, to make them proud. I did everything right. No secrets, no missions, just steps, clear and safe. And they still. I watched her fall quiet, her breath catching. "Still looked for the ghost of me," I offered. She nodded. So I tried to erase it. I let the silence settle. Between sisters, it often said more than any word. Finally, she sat again, and reached across the table, not to grab or accuse, but to hold my hand. The first time she'd touched me without armour. Her palm was trembling. "I didn't send that envelope out of malice," she said. "I sent it because I was drowning. And I thought, if you disappeared from the story entirely, maybe I'd finally get a full page." Her eyes met mine raw and honest. "But it didn't work. Not because they didn't see you, but because I still do." My voice came quieter than I expected. "I never wanted to compete with you, Erica. I just wanted to be loved without needing to explain. And I just wanted to matter without needing to win," she replied. For a long time, neither of us moved. Then she pulled out something from her purse, a folded piece of paper. She passed it to me. I opened it. It was a song we once wrote together, scribbled in crayon, titled "Sisters Shine." The bridge was circled. One voice lifts, but two can carry farther. Her handwriting had corrected mine. My misspelled shine turned to shine. I laughed, and for the first time in years, so did she. Maybe we forgot that I said. Maybe we both did. She leaned back, letting go of my hand. "You still sing?" I shook my head. "Not since Kandahar." "Shame," she said. "You were good. So were you." We sat in that half-lit room for what felt like hours. The paper between us like a truce. There would still be wounds, still things to mend, but something sacred had cracked. Not broken, just opened. For the first time, I saw her not as the rival who took my place, but as the girl who just wanted to be enough. And I think she finally saw me not as the star that blocked her light, but the sister who once shared her song. That moment of reconciliation carried me into the days afterward, when I thought the hardest battles lay behind me. But sometimes the most daunting trenches are not in distant sand. It's in answering the questions of those who carry your ghosts. Mason, a young lieutenant sprouted from the ranks I helped train, found me in the reading room at the base library. He looked small among the shelves, and his voice cracked when he spoke. "Captain Walsh, can I ask you something?" He brandished a photograph, an old grainy image of Corporal Jensen. Her face was bright, her uniform pressed, but her name was all he had. Why didn't anyone tell his story? I blinked back the weight of the past. The others had names Ortiz Lee, but Jensen's daughter Jenny had no memory but what I held and what Mason was seeking. There were reasons, I said, not excuses. Classified operations, security, gaps in reporting. The system isn't built for every story. He didn't move. He just stared. We drove out together to a remote military cemetery, not Arlington, but a place where ghosts found rest in the open. Mason carried the photograph, and my uniformed shoulders carried memories. The grass was too green, almost violent against the grey stones. We found Jensen's marker, a blank field, a generic stone with no insignia, no rank, no dates. "Why?" Mason asked, voice trembling like a gunmetal wire. "Why is his stone just empty?" I braced myself. Because officially there was no mission, no active engagement. And if there's no mission, there's no record, no expenses, no medals, no proof that people like him gave their lives. Mason knelt by the stone. "That's not right." He looked at me, grief and anger pooling in his young eyes. I knelt beside him and said it wasn't right. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small note. On it was written in careful handwriting, Operation Lark Shadow. It was real. He died saving people. Remember him as Corporal Jensen. Love, CW. I placed it on the stone. Mason watched, tentative, hopeful. I pressed it down with a finger. And beneath the paper, I revealed a small inscription I'd carved weeks ago, J.E. Jensen, L.L. Ortiz, C. Lee. Over the names, a line, Sacred Duty Unseen. He stared. A breeze lifted the note, so I pushed it tight into the grass. He turned to me. "How did you know I gestured toward the rock?" "I came here last month. when nobody was watching. I looked across the field at stones without names. Sometimes stories are buried because they threaten the narrative. But someone has to dig them up. Mason laid his hand on my shoulder as if I was both captain and fellow mourner. "Thank you." He rose, pocketing the photo. "He'll have a proper marker now." I nodded. "It's a start." He offered another question. "Will you tell my brother his name comes with a history?" I looked back at the field. Cress, grass, and wildflowers curled around the stones. "Yes," I said, "I will." That afternoon, I wrote a letter, a formal recommendation for a memorial plaque. I submitted records maps, classified incident reports, all redacted to ensure safety, but clear enough to verify truth. I sealed it and signed it Captain Walsh, and sometimes ghostwriter of memories. Back at home base, I glanced out the window at our flag full and flying. I felt the weight of sand in my boots again, but also something lighter, recognition. Not for me, but for those who'd given their lives quietly. A few days later, Mason found me again. He handed me a small replica of Jensen's new marker, bearing his name clasped in a sturdy box. "They approved it," he said quietly. I touched the metal plate. The name, the rank, real. He looked at me. "You gave him back his story." I realized he meant more than that. I had given myself back mine too. That night, I stopped by the hospital. Not because I needed stitches or sleep, but because there was someone I hadn't let heal, and his name had lived like an echo at the back of my silence. Luke. The man I left without goodbye, without closure. The man who once saw me before the camouflage, before the assignments erased my outline. I stood outside the ER bay where he worked, watching him chart notes with the same hands that used to trace maps on my back, in the quiet of midnight. His scrubs hung looser now, faint silver threading his temples. He hadn't noticed me. I knocked gently on the glass. He looked up, and for a moment nothing moved in the room. Then he walked out. "You're real?" he said, voice-low eyes scanning my face as if reading time backwards. "I thought maybe I made you up." "I used to wonder that too," I said. "About the version of me that lived in your life. Whether she was real or just a story you told yourself to make sense of my absence." "You vanished," he said. "I thought I did something wrong." I swallowed hard. "You didn't. I just couldn't be both who I had to be and who you deserved." He nodded slowly. "You left me a letter. No name, no explanation. Just folded paper with nothing written on it." I closed my eyes. I wrote it 12 times. I just couldn't leave words that might get someone hurt. So I left silence instead. I thought it would be safer for who he asked, but there was no accusation in it. Just a deep ache that matched mine. Luke took a slow breath. "You remember that night in Tucson?" "Before you deployed the second time," his voice was careful, brushing the edge of a shard he'd carried too long. "We stayed up till 3, talking on the hood of your Jeep. You told me you were afraid of disappearing without ever leaving a mark." I nodded, the image sharp in my mind. The desert wind, the scattered stars, his hand resting on mine like a silent vow. "I watched you drive away. The next morning," he continued, "and I knew it was goodbye even before you said it. But I kept hoping I was wrong." I looked at him, then really looked. He hadn't stood still all these years. He had built something, stayed, endured. I used to imagine telling you everything I said, the missions, the choices. I rehearsed the conversations in my head during surveillance stakeouts under blackout tarps. But it never felt safe. Or maybe I wasn't brave enough. He stepped closer, anchoring me in place with just his presence. "Do you want to tell me now?" "No," I said honestly, "because you deserve a truth that isn't filtered through regret, and I'm still unlearning how to carry mine." He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. "I kept this too," he said, placing a thin silver chain into my palm. It was the compass pendant I'd once worn under my uniform, always tucked beneath the fabric, close to skin, close to heart. "You found it. You left it in my glove box. I thought maybe it was a mistake." He paused. Then I realized maybe it wasn't. I closed my hand around it. The metal was cold, but it pulsed with memory. "I used to think it pointed me home," I murmured. "Turns out I didn't know where that was." "Maybe you still don't," he said. "But maybe that's okay." We stood there, the hallway around us empty. I wanted to cry, not out of pain, but out of the impossible gentleness he still carried for me. It didn't ask, didn't demand. It just stood, like he had long after I'd gone. "You're the only part of my story I never finished," I said. "You don't have to," he replied. "Some things aren't meant to be chapters. They're just the page where you learned something." I smiled, small but real. "I'm glad you're okay." "I am. And I'm glad you're here, even if it's just passing through." I looked at him one last time. "Thank you for keeping the parts of me I couldn't." Then, gently, I leaned forward and pressed my forehead to his. Not a kiss. Just the weight of shared silence. A goodbye that didn't hurt because it finally had space to breathe. When I left the hospital that night, the wind smelled faintly of sage and steel. The compass chain still in my pocket, the letter secure in my jacket. And I knew I was finally walking forward, not away from what we were, but toward whatever I was becoming. The next evening, I got an unexpected invitation from my father. No military protocol, no rank on the envelope, just for my daughter. It read like a small olive branch. His house hadn't changed much. Muted beige walls, warmed by dim yellow light. The low hum of an old refrigerator shelves, lined with Civil War replicas and dog-eared leather books. He was standing at the kitchen island when I arrived, wearing a plain sweater over a white shirt, no tie, no epaulettes, just Dad. I felt like I'd stepped into another world. "Dinner's almost ready," he said quietly, then leaned on the counter as if gathering courage. "Can we talk?" We sat at the small round table where my childhood birthday cakes once stood. Their overhead lamp cast a warm circle of light on the white tablecloth. He poured us both soup malted pumpkin, then paused before stirring. Not a spoon in sight, just 2 bowls, and silence. "Does it bother you?" he asked, voice low. "That I didn't look for you, that I didn't call?" It caught me off guard. "It did," I said. "For years. But I know why." He nodded, taking a spoonful that trembled with unspoken weight. "I was afraid of what I'd find, or what I'd see." His voice cracked the first fissure I'd heard in years. "When you were born, I made a promise. I swore by the blood you came from, blood of service, of duty, that I'd prepare you, but not break you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a lighter brass scratched with a simple code engraved Q3R8. I recognized it from my own gear, the code I'd used when I feared I'd disappear for good. "Your compass," he said. "I kept it after you left." The lamp's warm glow caught the letters, the flicker of memory. I held the lighter in my palm. It felt impossibly heavy, a physical tether to a father who had watched me grow and leave without protest. "I thought maybe you'd want it back," he said. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. He set the lighter down gently. "It's not just to light a cigarette. It's a reminder that even in darkness, someone was waiting to help you find your way." I thought of Luke's compass chain tucked in my pocket. 2 compasses for 2 journeys, one for love, one for belonging, and here another for home. He took a breath and continued. "When you were born, your mother, God rest her, called me in at dawn. You were crying before the sun even had a chance. I thought you'd wake the world. I said then." He paused, his large hand hovering above the soup bowl. I swore with this lighter's code stained into the back of my hand that you would not grow up alone, no matter where you walked. His hand shook. I watched the spoon tremble in his bowl of soup. Did you feel alone? He asked, eyes shining. I swallowed. Sometimes. He nodded, sorrow pulling in the lines of his face. He closed his eyes. Me too. He opened them again. So this is dinner. Not commanding, not leading, just us. He offered the spoon untouched. I took it and stirred slowly, my shoulder level so close I could feel his breath. You don't need orders to be my daughter, he said softly. The words felt like a gift I didn't know I needed. Just need to know you're here. I swallowed the soup, sweet, warm, forgiving. I found my spoon but didn't use it. Instead, I leaned forward and placed my hand on top of his. It was warm, familiar. Not the hand of a general or a commander, but the hand that had once steadied me when I learned to walk. I'm here, I said. The words hovered between us, fragile and whole. He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I saw his pride unhatted by rank, unshielded from emotion. He cleared his throat and reached under the table, pulling out a folded photograph of the three of us. Mom dadded me at my 5th birthday, blonde curls and glitter cake. You look scared, he said, like you were trying to understand why there was so much attention. I smiled softly. Maybe I was. He sighed. You were plenty brave already. I laughed. Quiet and true, still trying to be. He squeezed my hand once with all the weight of a lifetime in it. That's enough. Always has been. We finished dinner. No ranks, just father and daughter. No speeches, just soft confessions. The lighter sat in the centre of the table, a cipher of trust rekindled. When I left, he stood at the door. I felt his gaze on me as I disappeared into the night. He didn't salute. He didn't say goodbye. He just stood there, and somehow that was everything. That kind of presence, quiet and weightless, stayed with me into the next day as I walked the long corridor toward the lecture hall. My boots tapped gently against linoleum dusted in chalk. I was set to speak on tactical resilience, but the truth is, I hadn't brought notes. I came with nothing but a voice and a story. When I entered, the cadets were already seated, young and sharpened by eagerness. Erica was in the back, her uniform replaced by a slate grey sweater, her expression unreadable. She wasn't there to grade me. She was just there. Midway through my session, Mason raised his hand. His voice caught slightly in his throat. Captain Walsh, did you ever feel like... Your strength didn't matter because no one was watching. I glanced toward Erica, her eyes sharpened at the edges, but softened just enough to mirror the same question. I stepped away from the whiteboard. Yes, I said plainly, more often than I can count. I turned my eyes back to Mason. But strength isn't meant to be seen. It's meant to be carried, especially when no one's looking. I paused. How do you stay strong when no one sees you? The room held its breath. By choosing to continue even when broken. Mason stared at me, his throat bobbing as he swallowed emotion. I saw the shimmer of a tear slip down his cheek. He wiped it fast, almost ashamed. I walked closer and placed a hand on his shoulder. Never hide what cost you something to carry, I whispered. Courage isn't the absence of pain. It's the refusal to be erased by it. The air in the room stilled. Not reverent, not dramatic, just real. I picked up a piece of chalk and drew a single line across the whiteboard. This, I said, is what you leave behind when no one sees. A trace. A presence. I paused, then slowly erased it. Even if no one remembers, it still meant something. As students filtered out, I lingered near the board. Chalk dust clung to the air like memory. Mason stood still at his desk, his hands clenched. You okay? I asked. He nodded, then hesitated. Captain, I didn't ask just for me. His voice lowered. My uncle, Private First Class Andrew Kell. Libya. They said his file was sealed. My family doesn't talk about it. A chill tightened around my spine. I remembered the name. I remembered his voice in my earpiece whispering his daughter's name as the convoy bled into sand. I met Mason's eyes. Your uncle saved lives. He died with honor, and I never stopped carrying his story. His breath hitched. You were there. Yes, I said, and I remember everything. I reached into my coat and handed him a folded note. I kept the declassified parts. This belongs to your family. He clutched it tightly. Thank you for not letting him disappear. You reminded me why I never could, I replied. As he left, Erica remained behind. She leaned by the window, arms crossed. You didn't mention Libya, she said. No, I said. Today wasn't about me. I used to think you stayed strong just to spite us, to prove something. I used to think that too, I admitted. But really, I just didn't know how else to survive. She stepped closer. When you left, I told Mom you weren't coming back. Because you believed it. No, she said. Because I was afraid you would and I wouldn't know how to stand next to you. We both smiled, sad and knowing. She handed me something wrapped in tissue, an old piece of sheet music. Our childhood duet. I found this in Mum's piano bench, she said. You always hit the high note better, and you always held the harmony longer, I replied. We laughed gently. You were never the storm, she said. You were the anchor, and you were the one who made them look up. She looked out the window where dust caught sunlight like memory. I hated how easily you disappeared. Now I see it wasn't ease. It was necessity. We stood together at the edge of the board where my erased line still left a faint mark. I'm proud of you, she said. I'm proud of us, I whispered, and for the first time our presence didn't demand proof. It just existed, witnessed. Quiet. Enough. That quiet became my canvas the next morning as I entered the empty classroom I taught in. The chairs were stacked neatly along the walls, chalkboard wiped clean. Morning light filtered through tall windows, slicing across the floor in golden beams. I paused at the doorway, breathing in the hush. Dust motes hovered like memories floating in the air. On the teacher's desk lay a fold of paper. I walked to it. On top, in Erica's elegant script. Thank you for staying. No flourish, no title, just her name and a pause where everything could fit. I slid the note into my pocket and went to the front of the room. I stood before the empty desks. The quiet was profound, almost sacred. I closed my eyes. In my hands was my mission journal, hundreds of pages that carried names, coordinates, decisions made in darkness. I opened it to a random page. A map. A name. A date. I had carried it with me through every deployment, every ceremony. It was mine, but it wasn't mine anymore. I walked to the mirror mounted beside the whiteboard. The morning light caught it, casting a strip of brightness on the wall. My reflection was real now, not shadowed by rank, erased by misremembered files, or overshadowed by medals. I'd come to see the face behind the uniform. And that face was still here, worn, alive, visible. I opened the journal fully on a desk and placed the pen beside it. Then I walked out through the corridor, leaving the journal open like a gift. I paused in the hallway. The light sketched a path along the linoleum. I followed it to the small military library. I knew the librarian, Lieutenant Harris, was arranging shelves. He looked up as I entered. I have something for the archives, I said. He tilted his head, curious. I nodded toward the journal. He didn't speak. He took the journal from me with reverent fingers as though it was evidence of something human. We'll catalogue it, he said softly. Your service. Your story. I left the library slowly. The corridor stretched ahead, sunlight guiding the way. I stopped mid-hall, stepping into a beam of light, feeling it hold me. Maybe being seen starts with seeing yourself. I whispered it. The words echoed back soft. I believed them now. Later that evening, I found Erica waiting on my desk at home base. She handed me a folded piece of stationery. I recognized the paper smooth and cream-coloured, no uniform. Just sister. I opened it. Dear Jessie, I didn't know how to look up to you until I learned how to look across. Thank you for staying, for teaching, for being seen so I could finally see myself. Love, Erica. Her words were unseasonal blossoms, unexpected gentle. I stood at the window, holding the letter, tears warming my cheeks. I thought of everything, my journal now on shelves in that library, soldiers reading words I'd penned in silent nights. Mason's tear-streaked face holding the note about his uncle. Luke's compass chain and our forehead farewell. Dad's trusted lighter on the table. And Erica's thank you note, a blossom in January. Each word, each gift, each moment of being seen had shaped me. That night, I took the journal out. I turned to the first page and wrote a single sentence in bold, I see you. Then I closed it. Tomorrow, someone else would read it, maybe understand, maybe feel less alone. I looked around my small quarters uniform, hung boots, polished compass chain in a jewellery dish. I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. This time, I didn't judge or wonder. I just saw. Not the soldier, not the sister, not the daughter, just me. A woman who had endured, survived, and finally allowed herself to matter to herself. I lay in bed and listened to the distant sounds of the bass settling into night engines, humming distant laughter, footsteps fading down the hall. In the quiet, I heard nothing else. No expectation, no silence demanding proof. Just space filled with seeing and being seen. And in that space, everything held. So, if you've ever felt invisible, if your strength was built in silence, if you walked through rooms where no one knew the weight you carried, this story is yours too. You don't need medals or recognition or a crowd to clap when you rise. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stay, breathe, keep walking. And in time, let yourself be seen, not by everyone, just by the one who matters most, you. If this story touched something inside you, maybe something you've never been able to say out loud, know that you're not alone. We all carry invisible battles, and sometimes sharing them out loud helps us heal. If you're still listening, thank you. Truly. And if you'd like more stories like this, real, raw, human, consider subscribing. Not because the algorithm needs it, but because maybe you do. Drop your own story in the comments. I'll be reading. I see you.